Once, not so long ago, there was a thriving land of lush green valleys, its hills covered with deep, dense forests, its meadows filled with roaming marsupials, and its seas bursting with myriads of fish. Then in nights of destruction and fire it was overwhelmed. Its fertile plains succumbed to crushing ice. Today it is bleak and bitterly cold. Today no one dreams Antarctica was once a tropical paradise.
I have a question that's haunting me again. Where are you now? Are you happy? Are you at peace?
Whenever a magnetic field changes intensity or direction, an electric voltage will be generated. This is known as induction. But what incredible force could change the magnetic field of the Earth? What's needed is an external radio frequency pulse to hit the Earth's magnetic field. This could be from the Sun's coronal mass ejections, from outside the galaxy, from a planet wandering in disturbed motion, and maybe other causes like comets. If this external radio frequency pulse happens to be in harmony with our own electromagnetic field, a huge transfer of energy occurs. And just as at the subatomic level, a flip of the magnetic axis happens. This will probably also be followed by a flip of the physical axis as well. An invading radio frequency pulse forms around the Antarctic. This tends to be confirmed by Anthony Pratt's worldwide study of ancient man's petroglyphs. Their orientation is always towards the Antarctic. It becomes unstable and then suddenly discharges. This is how I suspect the Earth was rotating before the flip. And then from outside of Earth, an invading radio frequency pulse interfered with the magnetic field of the Earth. All of a sudden, there was a dramatic flip. Then the axis of the Earth changed. And here we see the Earth as it spins and rotates today. Notice how Antarctica and Greenland have totally changed their positions. So maybe Antarctica was like this. What sort of things you see there?
Well, you know, like no reason to believe it wasn't. You know, like the ferns, the trees, the whole world, no doubt, was like this at one stage. And the Antarctic, definitely, in my opinion, was like this. Yeah, it was a tropical paradise. And
this is your third visit to Antarctica, Ian, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, this is my old mate Ian Dundas, a veteran of 3 trips now, isn't it? Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, yeah.
And what about Antarctica really struck you the most?
Oh, the awesomeness of the place, the power, the colours, the majesty, everything about it. Like there was not one element. The animals were there. Everything was there. Everything was in place, and everything had its place, and everything functioned. And we, as human beings, were interlopers, you know. But nobody cared. Nothing cared.
And I was interested. You were saying when those icebergs break off and they crack, that really sort of grabbed you.
Well, because of the power, You know, because these things are massive. You know, hundreds of thousands of tons, millions of tons, massive, uncontrollable, out of control.
Not subject to man's whims and fancies.
Oh yeah, well, man is just nothing in comparison to them. Yeah.
Spin the boat around, Michael, please, so we can get a view of the iceberg. Thank you very much. Yes, I am really here. This is not just a cardboard facsimile. Wish you were all here, but obviously you can't be, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
We're inside of this glacier actually, and this bloody thing in front of us is a bloody great iceberg. It's just been carved off this glacier. Oh, these are the other boys coming in.
What do you reckon, Bullbag?
What do you think?
Yeah, we'll go around. Yeah.
Inside this glacier, there's icebergs on the glacier on one side and icebergs on the other. It's just fabulous.
Let me get that, man.
Yeah, the boat. This gives you a perspective of how bloody big this joint is. Just check this out. Hey, look at the little chasm in here of solid ice. Just look at the colours and there's a penguin just frolicking around. We've got to be really quiet here so we don't disturb the icebergs. You just sneak up on them really gently and quietly. Hands and knees is the best approach.
Oh God, this is so beautiful.
Isn't it gorgeous? Look at the hole in it. Yeah! We did it! We did it!
Let's go to Wald Thornhill. He's got some interesting explanations about how earthquakes, meteorites and other cosmological events cause horrendous damage here on Earth.
We're at the Tidbinbilla Deep Space Tracking Centre just outside Canberra. It's one of 3 tracking stations used by the Deep Space Tracking Network in the world. There is one in Spain, one in Goldstone, California, and one here in Australia at Canberra. Radio telescopes are the means by which we can now trace the electrical nature of the universe, because they are able to measure the magnetic fields in deep space, and it has been found that these magnetic fields are strung between galaxies. They thread through galaxies and they surround the stars in galaxies. The idea of electrical activity in the cosmos flies in the face of cosmology, which relies on a gravitation-only model. This is despite the fact that NASA finds evidence day by day that gravity cannot explain. The electric force is 1,000 billion times stronger than gravity. If you look at our solar system, it's a complete fruit salad. The different characteristics of the planets, their tilts, their spins and their atmospheres, all belie the idea that this has been a natural progression from some simple beginning. And when NASA looks into deep space, we see things changing more rapidly than is expected on this kind of slow evolutionary picture. This belief in a Newtonian clockwork solar system, where what we see today in the skies you would have seen 4 billion years ago. But nothing could be further from the truth. The ancient skies would bear no resemblance at all to what we see today. In fact, I would guarantee that if any of us were transplanted back in time, if that were possible, that we would be frightened out of our wits. Well, it's interesting that you say that there were magnetic reversals found at the site, because that indicates a change in electrical currents. Basically, you don't get a magnetic field without an electric current.
Oh, that's a precursor to...
So that's an indicator that we're looking at an electrical phenomenon. And when you talk about auroras, they of course are one of the grandest electrical phenomena that we see on Earth. and we know that auroras are connected with activity on the sun, but we do have very strong evidence now from research being done in modern plasma physics that around the world were witnessed auroras which were thousands of times more powerful than present-day aurora. And we can say that with fair certainty because when you get that kind of energy, the plasma takes on forms which we don't see in the sky today, but which are very characteristic of what we see in plasma labs.
Oh, okay.
So the change in currents, the change in magnetic field could have been associated with these super powerful auroras. Now, there have been peer-reviewed published papers on this phenomenon of super powerful auroras, so we're not just making this up, so to speak. And the way we can test this is by looking at the kind of imagery that not only the Aborigines but also all prehistoric peoples around the world recorded by chipping into stone or their artwork on rock.
These
and so on.
petroglyphs, I believe.
The petroglyphs, that's right. And the interesting thing is that we've found that the shapes, these weird shapes which have been interpreted as stick men or even as astronauts, you know, because of the strange helmet-like protuberances and horns and so on.
Virginia and...
That's right. The fact that we can tie these in now to these high-energy discharge phenomena in plasma labs means that it gives a very strong argument for the fact that the ancients witnessed not only the super powerful auroras but lived through a time when something strange was going on in the solar system.
So you're saying, well, just to make sure I've got this right, that the shapes that they carved into rock resembled the shapes you're seeing in these plasma discharges in laboratories.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that as this high energy discharge takes place in the laboratory, the shape changes over time.
Right.
Very quickly in the laboratory, but if you consider something on the scale of the Earth or an aurora, it takes place over a more extended period of time. So, and some of the shapes were very distinctive. One of them is known as the squatter man, which is a figure with the arms upraised like this at right angles and the legs also splayed at right angles.
Yeah. And
the strange thing is that almost without exception around the world you find that these dots are drawn between the elbow and the knee. Yeah. And this, of course, makes no sense according to the way we look at the world today. But in the plasma lab we find that this is precisely what you see. The figure with the arms, apparent arms upraised and the legs out at right angles, the plasma toroid, which is seen as two circles between the knees and the elbows, and also something that looks a bit like a head or a shape at the top.
So we've actually got photographs of this phenomenon in the laboratory.
Yes.
And tell me, well, the thing here is, with a magnetic reversal or whatever caused this electromagnetic aurora, what effects would be happening on Earth once it reaches a certain point? Perhaps you could tell us the certain point that it becomes, let's say, critical.
Okay, well, at those kinds of energies, when the discharge is that powerful...
And they do discharge.
Yeah, it is an electrical discharge. It's a cosmic discharge, if you like. The central part of this apparition generates X-rays, which can be lethal.
Yeah.
So that people would have recognised that this object in the sky had a profound effect on animals and themselves. And also, if the discharge to the ground was sufficiently powerful, you would get super lightning bolts, which are quite destructive and can actually sculpt the landscape to some extent.
So that actually tears Earth away from the landscape and pushes it up in the air? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We've seen this in a small scale, where some super bolts have hit the ground and they carve channels, sinuous channels.
Yeah, I've seen one on golf courses.
Yes,
that's
right.
Yeah.
Well, if you imagine that scaled up thousands, tens of thousands of times, you can imagine that whole river courses could have been sculpted in moments.
Okay, just getting back to the sort of damage, what possibilities are there if we're seeing an aurora in the sky? What sort of things could cause it? No one actually knows, but there's some strong possibilities, you feel.
Well, one suggestion is, of course, that it could be due to an outburst from the sun, a particularly powerful one. And that is certainly one possibility. But the stories that I've seen from the people who've remembered and passed down the stories, like the Australian Aborigines, suggest otherwise. They suggest that there were large cometary bodies near the Earth at that time. And when you have two celestial bodies, particularly cometary bodies, moving through the solar system towards the Sun or away from the Sun, there is strong electrical discharge activity taking place on that body. That's what a comet is. It's an electric discharge phenomenon. It's got nothing to do with heating from the Sun.
And I think you were one of the first to predict that when that, what probe was it that went to the comet?
The Deep Impact probe, yes. When the experiment was announced, I suggested a number of things that they would discover which would be contrary to what was expected, and if the comet is just an inert rock travelling through the solar system. And the one which was spectacularly confirmed was the flash before the main outburst.
And what comet was that? That was
Temple 1.
Temple 1, and that was an American probe.
Yes, there was a copper projectile about the size of a washing machine that was fired towards, in the path of the comet. And the comet was travelling at a huge speed, much faster than a bullet. And so when it encountered the copper projectile, they expected there to be a mechanical explosion.
And in fact it was discharged between the two. So the rock carvings and paintings of ancient mankind hold a hidden key to the ancient destructions upon Earth. But what about his legends and myths? Do they reveal a similar story? I consulted Rens van der Slee, an expert in this area.
It has never been a secret to comparative mythologists that mythological traditions from many different parts of the world contain numerous striking similarities. And this includes a large body of myths you might call creation mythology, stories about the making of the world in its current form, but also about the often catastrophic ending of past eras. Those parallels between cultures do not just concern obvious or mundane phenomena like the rising of the sun in the east or the lunar cycle. They include a large number of anomalous phenomena, motifs, widespread, that don't seem to make any sense from our modern point of view. For example, a common belief attested worldwide was that the sky was solid, perhaps made of rock or metal, with a hole at the center, perhaps at the pole. Or that 4 large pillars, trees or mountains, stood at the cardinal directions on the surface of the earth and held up the sky from there. That the disk of the earth itself was round, that a circular ocean was stretched around this disk, that a serpent, perhaps biting its tail, inhabited that circular ocean. I've been able to identify at least 100 different such archetypes that collectively define what you might call an archaic cosmology attested worldwide. This in itself is an important discovery, but there's more. There's an entire fixed chronology intrinsic to creation myths in individual cultures. And that is a momentous insight. It's an insight that has certainly not been noted in the standard works on mythology that you find in your local bookstore or perhaps in your university library. Geomagnetic storms occurring on an unprecedented scale in the past go a very long way towards explaining many of the details we find embedded in these creation stories. And that is because many of the particulars in the morphology of that archaic world, with all its pillars, with all its layers, its strata, can be explained quite readily in terms of plasma physics, in terms of the electromagnetic structuring of the immediate surroundings of the Earth, the magnetic field of the Earth, the polar lights, the auroras functioning therein, may assume, hypothetically, under extreme circumstances, certain morphologies that would make sense of the creation stories we find worldwide.
I pondered Rens's mythological archetypes and wondered which one would best suit the creation of the Antarctic ice shelf. This is my favourite.
To have massive dumps of snow, you must have the heat necessary to provide water vapour to form snowflakes. In a common theme, Ovid tells how Phaeton drove his father Helios's chariot chaotically around the heavens, causing the earth to burn. The rivers and the seas were dried up and the cities destroyed. Eventually, Phaeton was destroyed by a thunderbolt from Zeus, and for a while the world became dark. Then condensation turned to snow and rain. This motive is common throughout the ancient world. Let me read what Plato tells us. There have been many destructions of mankind, arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by fire and water. Now, the Phaeton story has the form of a myth, but really it signifies a changing of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth. Just this scenario may explain the formation of the Antarctic ice shelf. The earth appeared to wander on its axis, and the earth burnt, until finally a discharging lightning torus formed a new harmonic as the earth changed its axis.
We ran down from the mountain a river out to sea. We lift off to the stars above. Our spirits shine for free.